Good afternoon and welcome back to the Public Service Commission in this proceeding involving docket 2023-2-E, which is the annual review of base rates for fuel cost for Dominion Energy South Carolina Incorporated. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carol Lee Williams, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. And with us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Justin Williams. We're still on the company's case, and we recognize Mr. Anselmo.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. The company's going to call Alan Rooks and James Neely to the stand.
Madam Court Reporter, if you would swear the witnesses in, please.
Raise your right hand, please.
Mr. Rooks, could you please state your full name for the record?
Alan Wessinger Rooks.
Thank you. And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy Services as the manager of regulation for Dominion Energy South Carolina.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 16 pages of corrected direct testimony pre-filed on March 8th, 2023?
Yes.
And if I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed corrected direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Thank you. Chair Belzer, I move the pre-filed corrected direct testimony of Mr. Rooks be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Rooks' pre-file corrected direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
And thank you. And Mr. Rooks, did your pre-filed corrected direct testimony include exhibits labeled as corrected exhibits AWR 1 through AWR 5, exhibits AWR 6 through AWR 9, corrected exhibits AWR 10 and AWR 11, and exhibits AWR 12 through AWR 15?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits?
I do not.
Chair Belzer, I move that the exhibits attached to Mr. Rooks' pre-filed corrected direct testimony be entered in the record as the next composite hearing exhibit. I believe that to be number 5.
Correct. It is exhibit number 5. And am I correct that it is, I just had them listed AWR 1 through AWR 15, but it is corrected exhibit AWR 1 through AWR 5, exhibits AWR 6 through AWR 9, corrected exhibits AWR 10 through 11, and then AWR 12 through 15.
That's correct.
Okay. Those exhibits will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 5. Is there any objection? Hearing none, will be admitted into the record as hearing exhibit 5.
Thank you. And Mr. Rooks, have you prepared a summary of your corrected direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Could you please present it?
Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. My corrected direct testimony provides the company's currently approved electric fuel factors, actual and projected data on base fuel costs, variable environmental and avoided capacity costs, and distributed energy resource avoided and incremental costs and collection for the period January 1st, 2022 through April 30th, 2024.
Mr. Rooks, can you get that microphone a little bit closer? We've got some virtual folks that need to hear you. Thank you.
Try it. How's that?
That's better. Thank you, sir.
In support of my direct testimony, I'm sponsoring corrected exhibits. Also, my testimony provides the proposed base fuel, variable environmental, and avoided capacity, DER avoided, DER incremental, and total fuel cost factors for retail electric customers for the period May 2023 through April 2024. In support of my direct testimony, I'm sponsoring corrected exhibits AWR 1 through 5, exhibits AWR 6 through 9, corrected exhibits AWR 10 and 11, and exhibits AWR 12 through 15. Since the filing of my corrected direct testimony, the company has entered into a stipulation with the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff and the South Carolina Energy Users Committee that would reduce the total fuel cost factors initially proposed by the company. If approved, the stipulated total fuel cost factors per kilowatt hour by retail customer class would be 4.493 cents per kilowatt hour for residential, 4.467 cents per kilowatt hour for small general service, 4.452 cents per kilowatt hour for medium general service, 4.413 cents per kilowatt hour for large general service, and 4.352 cents per kilowatt hour for lighting. The monthly per account DER incremental charge by retail class would be $1 for residential customers, $7.91 for small and medium general service customers, and $100 for large general service customers. The proposed changes in the stipulation will impact customer bills as follows. For a DESC residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours per month, the average monthly bill would increase from $140.57 to $146.06, or 3.91%, inclusive of revenue taxes. For a DESC commercial customer with a 500 kVA demand using 150,000 kilowatt hours per month, the average monthly bill would increase from $17,652 to $18,471, or 4.63% inclusive of revenue taxes. Finally, for a DESC industrial customer with a 10,000 kW demand using 6,570,000 kilowatt hours per month, or a 90% load factor, the average monthly bill would increase from $507,656 to $543,725, or 7.11%, inclusive of revenue taxes. The company requests that these factors and charges be effective for all customer classes for bills rendered on and after the first billing cycle of May 2023 and continuing through the billing month of April 2024. Finally, the company also respectfully requests that the Commission issue an order finding DESC's fuel purchasing practices, plant operations, and fuel inventory management were reasonable and prudent. This concludes the summary of my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Rooks. And Mr. Neely, could you please state your full name for the record? Jim, could you turn your microphone on?
James W. Neely.
And by whom are you employed and what capacity?
I'm employed by Dominion Energy Services Incorporated as an energy market strategic advisor for Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Thank you. And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 22 pages of pre-filed direct testimony filed on February 15th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
And did your pre-filed direct testimony include any exhibits?
No.
And do you have any corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes. On page 10, line 11, I need to strike the words pursuant to Commission Order number 2022-329 and capitalize the word "the" that will not now start the sentence.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. And if I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony subject to that correction today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I move Mr. Neely's pre-filed direct testimony as corrected today be entered into the record as given orally from the stand.
Mr. Neely's pre-filed direct testimony is corrected from the stand will be entered into the records as if given orally.
And thank you. Mr. Neely, did you prepare a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Could you please present it to the Commission?
Good afternoon, Chair Belzer and members of the Commission. The company calculated the value of each of the 11 components of value for distributed energy resource avoided cost contained in the Commission-approved net energy metering methodology for the current period and for the value over the 20-year planning period. The specific values for each component are set forth in my testimony. The difference between the two values represents the future benefits of DER that are subject to recovery by the company in this proceeding. Using the NEM methodology results in a total value of NEM distributed energy resources of $0.04294 per kilowatt hour for the current period and $0.04434 per kilowatt hour for the 20-year value. I'll briefly summarize the company's methodology for each component of the NEM value stack. For avoided energy costs, The component uses the PURPA avoided cost values with an adjustment to remove the cost of criteria pollutants and environmental cost. The avoided energy periods were adjusted to only include daylight hours rather than the all hours methodology previously used in order to comply with the Commission's requirement to calculate avoided energy that includes seasonal and temporal variations. For avoided capacity costs, the company has no capacity needs until 2029. This 20-year calculation is based on the difference in revenue requirements method and assumes coal plant retirements in 2029 and 2031, and the addition of 105 megawatt air derivative turbines to meet a winter reserve margin of 20.1%. For ancillary services, customer generators do not provide ancillary services for compensation from electric utilities. If the situation changes in the future, the company will investigate how it could create programs to leverage DER to provide ancillary services. For T&D capacity, new NEM customers were capped as of June 1st, 2021. The net metering customer count will continue to decrease as customers move to the Solar Choice tariff. The company used its commission-approved methodology to calculate the 20-year value for T&D capacity. For avoided criteria pollutants cost, DESC associates a positive avoided cost value to criteria pollutants NOx and SO2. For avoided CO2 emissions cost, South Carolina has no state law, federal law, or regulation creating cost for the emissions of CO2 pollutants. For fuel hedging, DESC does not engage in financial fuel hedging for electric generation. The energy benefits of the company's zero fuel cost resources are captured in the company's calculation of avoided energy cost. For utility integration and interconnection cost, this value is set pursuant to Commission order. There are no unrecovered NEM interconnection costs that have been identified for the review period. For utility administration costs, these costs are being collected through a distributed energy resource rider added to the fuel clause and are not calculated in the NEM value stack. For environmental cost, this component captures the positive avoided cost value for the cost of environmental materials such as lime, limestone, and ammonia used in electric generation. For line loss component, the company does not yet have the AMI data needed to complete its evaluation and plan for this component. Therefore, the company used its current approved approach for deriving losses for the transmission and distribution system, which is based on a rigorous analysis of meter data. In conclusion, the company respectfully requests that the Commission approve the calculation of the total value of net energy metering distributed energy resources as set forth in my direct testimony. This concludes my summary.
Thank you. Chair Belzer, Mr. Rooks and Mr. Neely are available for questions from the non-stipulating parties in the Commission.
Thank you. Say CCL.
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for these witnesses? Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Neely, since you were the last one to say something.
Okay.
I think page 10. Yeah, page 10 of your direct, and you just mentioned it, the calculation based on DRR method and assumes resource plan based on 784 megawatts coal retirements in 2029, plus 610 megawatts of coal plant retirements in 2031. Which ones are those, or what is that exactly? Remind me.
Right, that's the our latest IRP plan, and it includes the retirement of the watery units, which amount to 684 megawatts at the end of 2028, and the Williams coal plant, 610 megawatts at the end of 2030.
Okay, now remind me though, is that based on engineering benefit cost analysis? Is that they beyond their useful lives? It's too costly to upgrade them?
It's really a number of factors. Those plants are aging. In order to continue to run those plants, we have to do about $100 million of work at each plant for the ELG, Effluent Limitation Guideline. So that comes into play. And because they're aging, we continue to have to spend money on them to keep them operating. And I know there was a lot of questions about coal retirements and some of the other witnesses. We have flexibility still. We have to make decisions about spending the money on ELG by 2025. We have made the decision to spend the money at Williams. We're still trying to decide whether we spend the money at Wateree on ELG. So after we spend the money at Williams, we have the flexibility to continue to run Williams past that date. But the economic evaluation indicates that we should retire those plants on those dates. So that's based on the economics.
Good. Thank you very much. I was going to ask you about the ELCC and the 2.2% in the Monte Carlo, but let's just forget that. We'll pick that up some other time.
Okay.
Mr. Rooks, I did not try to even act like I was going to check all these numbers you had on these little teeny-weeny numbers on these exhibits. But I did look at them, and then, you know, I just kind of ran some checks, just see where they came from. And I think I followed most of it, but God, it was painful. And I know it's hard to get that on 8.5 by 11, but maybe we can start going with 11 by 17. I'm not sure. Anyway, on your exhibit, at least what I have is AWR 9, which is page 26 of however many pages it is. It's the summary of Distributed Energy Resource Program incremental cost, May 2023 through April 2024. The balance at period ending, that's line 11. And that 13,159,223, that came from the previous, I think, AWR-8. That's just a carryover from January 2022 to April 2023. Is that correct?
Correct. The previous exhibit ends at April 30 of this year.
Mr. Rooks, I really need for you to speak into that microphone. Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
the previous exhibit ends at April 30th of this year. And so that is brought forward onto the next exhibit where it picks up at May 23 and moves forward. So that's right.
And the projected balance for April 2024 is 37 million, I think 35,000. I'm glad this isn't an eye test. 34 million something. I think that's 35,615, something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, I read 37,035,615.
Yes, you're right, and I'm wrong. You're correct. Let me borrow my glasses here. I followed the allocations and the class allocations, but the average customers, is this physically the number of customers? You take these and divide it by that number. Is that the number of customers? 681,250, for example. Is that residential?
Correct. That would be representative of the average number of customers over that period from May 23 to April 2024.
So what this is telling me, and I trying to get to the bottom line, is you got those allocations, you break those up respectively over the residential, small, medium, large general services, take that 37 million plus, using those percentages, allocations rather, divided up over the customers, and I'm assuming that where it says annual rate calculation, that is for each customer, $28.52 is the residential customer share of this value, this cost, 37 million. Is that correct?
Correct. On an annual basis, that's correct.
And does that, and it's limited by statute, I think $1 and $100. So how much of that $35,035,615 is recovered?
So not all of it, but when we take that balance and roll it into the next year, it kind of becomes part of the total again, and we spread it amongst the customers. But if you were to look at, if we maxed out the caps, every customer class was charged its maximum allowable amount by law, we could recover around 21.5 million. And if you look at the 12 months that we present here in the forecast from May 23 to April 24, we've got around 23.9 million of projected spend. So we would be about 2.3 million or so under recovered, even if we were maxed out. So we're not going to recover all of those amounts. And as a result, this under collection will grow. And we anticipate that will continue to grow until such time as some of these programs begin to sunset. And then those costs will roll off, and we'll see our forecasted costs go down. And then these rates will begin to chip into that under collected balance, if you will.
So absent the statutory limits, the $1 per residential node, these numbers would be higher, and somebody's customers are basically paying for this, but it would be more.
Yes. If my calculations are correct, it would be $2.38 a month for residential, and it would be $1,930 a month for large general service customers, as opposed to $100.
Okay. Well, I understand. I know what it goes to. I understand what it covers. This is probably, I'll ask ORS these questions, but I was looking at the exhibits, I think, of Mr. Thompson. His exhibits where he, I guess, shows the percentage of generation mix monthly, the nuclear, coal, gas, so forth. And I think we've already touched on it, but the nuclear and coal is right now roughly a little over 40% of the generation mix, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Looked at you, Mr. Neely. I didn't know who was going to answer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry,
And
I was thinking about ELCC. I'm sorry.
we'll save that. And the nuclear average fuel cost, which is cents per kilowatt hour for nuclear, is 0.663 cents per kilowatt hour. The Williams coal plant is 4.17 cents, and the Wateree plant is 4.199 cents per kilowatt hour. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So 40% of your generation is right now the least cost fuel, but that can vary depending on what the price of gas does, what the price of coal does, and those kind of fluctuate over the lifetime, right?
That's right. I think probably in my career, you could always start with run-of-river hydro. As long as the laws of gravity hold, you know, that's the cheapest source of power that we've got, our run-of-river hydro. And then next is nuclear. And then after that in my career, it switched around. It's gone from coal to gas, to coal to gas, but there's an ebb and a flow there for sure.
You're right. Hydro is pretty good. Kind of hard building dams, though.
Yeah, pretty expensive.
I know I had one or two more questions for you, Mr. Neely, and I don't want to take a lot of time to find them, but I just can't put my hands on it, and I'll regret it as soon as I push the button and say no more questions. But right now, no more questions.
Commissioners, Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belser. I suspect most of these questions are for Mr. Rooks, but I invite both of you to answer them. Mr. Rooks, what I want to ask about is really the ability to estimate the fuel cost over time. And what I'm struck by is that we have the estimate in your testimony from the mid-year period, which I understand you might not have in front of you, but what the note I have is 471,230,102. Does that sound about right?
Yes, subject to check, that sounds about right.
Okay.
I won't argue.
Okay. Well, what I notice is that the estimate now, based on newer information, is 400, in terms of the over collection, is about 400, almost 452 million.
Yes, you're reading that as of the end of December 2022. That's correct, 452 million.
Details matter. So what I see is about, a little less than, about 20 million in difference, and wondered what we can attribute that to, whether there are any lessons learned from, estimating versus the reality.
So what I would say to that is that a lot of the cost in December were attributable to Winter Storm Elliott and some of the power purchases the company had to make to ensure reliability for its customers at that time. So that had some contributing cause and effect there. And then I would say that gas prices in December were actually higher than probably what we had forecasted by a little bit as well. But when you add those things up, I think one of the things it teaches, and certainly we saw all too well last year, is the volatility of the gas price drives the over or under collections in most of these months. If you see wide swings, it's probably going to be around that gas cost.
You're helping me to understand this, but what I see is a December number in the mid-year that is significantly higher than the current actual number. And so I wonder if that's not more the reflection of the actual gas prices. But maybe I'm misunderstanding some part about the relevance of Winter Storm Elliott.
Yeah,
so help me.
And it's really tough too, because that mid-period was based on one gas forecast, right?
Right.
So that was at a point in time, and you have to forgive me, I don't remember the exact date, but it was back during the summer,
right,
when that forecast would have been generated. And as I recall, July, August, and September is when we really saw a pretty substantial run-up
right,
in the gas costs. So I suspect that those gas costs used in that forecast were a good deal higher than those, even though gas prices were high over the back half of the year, maybe those estimates were even higher than
right,
what they came in at.
Does that just, are there any lessons learned, or is it just that this past year was really volatile and gas prices can be very volatile?
Yeah, certainly. I was looking over in preparation for the hearing today our forecasted gas ranged from last year, and it was in the $3 range.
Mm-hmm.
And as we came in here last year, or as we filed that testimony last year, we certainly weren't aware of what was about to unfold around the world in Ukraine. So that caught, obviously, everyone off guard. And Europe, began to procure gas on a tremendous scale. And then that, of course, had an effect here on prices of gas in the U.S. And Ms. Jackson can speak to this certainly better than I can, but nobody foresaw that. And so one of the tools that we use to forecast our gas costs, we do not do that in-house. We rely on the NYMEX strip, as you'll hear us speak of it.
Right.
And so, anyone can go out and click on that at any point in time and see what future expectations are for gas prices at the Henry Hub. And so, at the time last year, certainly those costs were down, but nobody foresaw what was about to happen. And so that's how we wound up in a situation where we saw an escalating under collection, which led us to a mid-period filing, which we had not done since 2008, and we just completed that late last year and put those rates in January, and now we're back now. And one of the things you see with this factor, if you look at it compared to last spring's fuel factor, our forecast period cost is roughly the same. I think it's 2.7 and 2.8 cents roughly. But what you see is the effect of that under collection and the balance that got built up last year as a result of those high gas prices drove that under collection to a unprecedented level for us. Certainly as high as 451 million at the end of December. I can report to the commission that as of the end of February, that number is back down to 428. So some progress has been made, but make no mistake, that is an extremely large number in our history.
What happens going forward if there's more volatility, and let's just say the price goes up, and then the other question is if the price comes down?
So certainly if the price goes up, we're going to see more pressure, similar to what we saw last year. What I would say is that right now in our energy mix, gas is probably 45 to 50%. So, and that number has been pretty constant through the years. Nuclear is around 20% and coal is around 20%. Solar right now is around 8% of our energy mix. So a good contributing portion of that. And so what we have to count on is these low cost sources, as I was discussing with Commissioner Caston, and some of these solar contracts in a period of volatility can provide ballast. They can pull that average rate back down such that you don't see as much volatility. But what I would say is that as gas prices go up, they can also decline. And so one of the reasons we're able to make up the kind of ground that we're seeing here with this factor over the next 12 months is lower gas prices. So should that play out, should those gas prices stay at low or moderate levels, I would expect the story to be much different when we come in next year. And the news would be better.
Let's hope so.
We all do.
This may not be a question for you, but I'm going to still pitch it your way. In the state statute, is there any ability for there to be cost sharing between the shareholders and the customers?
So I don't see that. I'm certainly not an attorney, so I don't want to render legal opinions here, but I don't think that the state statute allows for that. And one thing I'll say is that as I understood some of those conversations, maybe in the mid-period proceeding, if it's around the forecasted level of cost versus what actually happens and taking some kind of difference and then determining some kind of predetermined split, if you will, if the customers keep some, shareholders keep some, if there's a difference, the the thing that I would say about that is you've got to be careful of creating unintended consequences there because, and I'll just use an example. If the company were to come back and be under collected by 50 million, and we were to have to say that 25, let's just do a simple 50-50 split of that and say, okay, the company missed its forecast by 50 million, so the shareholders are going to be exposed to 25 million, and the customers will pick up the other 25. Then what that's going to condition the companies or the utilities to do is to pad that forecast going forward or to put maybe increased forecasted costs in there. And that's not good either, right? Because that will put an upward pressure on the rate. So we kind of wind up going in a circle and coming back to, well, why don't you use the forecast information you have? And that's exactly what we do. And this mechanism trues that up, right? Customers don't pay any more or any less than the actual fuel cost because we're going to true that up each month. And so I think that's fair, and I think that's what the statute contemplates. And you know, just my opinion, I don't know that it allows for cost share.
I appreciate the answer and the extrapolation on it. Thank you very much. No further questions.
Commissioners, questions?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Justin Williams?
I just want to thank the panel for addressing the flexibility question that I asked earlier. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, further questions?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Irvin?
thank you. You mentioned hydro and how efficient it is and how cost effective it is. Are there any sites in the South Carolina service territory for Dominion to even consider the possibility of adding new hydro?
I'll be glad to answer that question. We haven't identified any sites where we would be willing to move forward with adding hydro. Hydro is one of the most difficult things to site and permit. And although it could be done if the site was just right, we haven't identified any of those sites in our territory.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I can understand that permitting could be certainly an issue. What about geothermal? Because I've been reading a lot about geothermal, and it seems to work fairly well. Is that something that you could scale up to make a difference, or is it just going to be left to the individual homeowner or landowner to try to install on their own?
I don't know what the answer is to that. I haven't looked at geothermal.
Are you aware of any investor-owned utilities that are using geothermal as a generation source?
Only in the West that I'm aware of.
And finally, we don't talk much in South Carolina about offshore wind, but I understand that perhaps there are some sites off the South Carolina coastline up near the North Carolina line that might be available for lease. Is that an option? I know you're doing a big project up off the coast of Virginia, but do you have any future plans to consider offshore wind?
Well, in our IRP that we're going to show you here in August, we're going to show you that we have included offshore wind in some of the resource plans, and we'll talk more about that. Total Energies has paid $160 million for a plot off the coast of South Carolina where they intend or hope to build offshore wind. So if that project comes online, there may be the opportunity for South Carolina to purchase some of that wind from Total Energies.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that, and I look forward to hearing more about it when we get to the integrated resource plan. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners? Mr. Rooks, I have a couple of questions, and one is, I think you're usually the tariff guy. You usually have the tariff sheets attached to your testimony, and in these proceedings and in the base rate case. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And I don't expect you to know every charge in the tariff, but we heard something earlier that seemed a little bit unusual to me. Does Dominion have an approved charge to render a paper bill?
I certainly am not aware of that. I am a Dominion gas customer, and I get a paper bill each month, and I have not seen such a charge.
Okay. You're not aware
I'm
of
wondering if the customer may have been confused with another bill, but I'm not aware of any charge
okay.
along those lines.
Certainly not $2 a month. Does that doesn't ring a bell at all, does it?
No.
Okay. I was just curious about that. As Dominion goes through the year, are the fuel forecasts conducted monthly to kind of see where they're going?
I don't know if I would say as frequently as monthly, but certainly in the past year, we have run an awful lot of them.
Okay, well, let me ask you, this is kind of where I'm going with that. I mean, with the volatility seen in the summer of 2022 that led to Dominion filing for a mid-year increase, and let's just take the huge undercollection that is at issue right now. What would have to be, what would Dominion need to see to come in and ask for a mid-year decrease? Or mid-period, not mid-year, but mid-period decrease?
I would think certainly if you saw that balance decline to a situation where there's, dramatic over-collected positions, then I would think that could lead to a mid-period, filing the other way. Now, is there an exact number? I can't sit here and tell you that there is, but if you see a dramatic increase and we can effectuate that in a short enough time, I would think it would be considered.
Well, I'm just curious as to what is happening monthly with either watching the balance or forecast. What would Dominion be doing monthly to determine if all of a sudden there might be some relief for the customers from the fuel factor due to collecting under this?
So certainly, I think this
I
collection.
I just think it's easier to see the increase. The way I look at it, it's y'all may see the increase, but do you see an overcollection that might lead to a rate reduction as easily as you would see the increase?
So what I would offer up then is that in this proceeding, we are in this stipulation setting a factor such that if everything were to play out as we saw it today, gas prices were to play out the way we have them in the forecast, operations were to play out the way we have them in the forecast, all the maintenance outages, customer loads, and everything, we would be back to zero this year. So I don't know if do you have a copy of my exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Close at hand?
Yes, sir.
If you could turn to Exhibit 2.
I'm there.
Okay. So if you look down that list of rates there on corrected Exhibit 2, if you'll notice about under line item number 2, the over under collection, and you see the number there, I believe is 1.745 cents.
Yes, sir.
So if we were to come back next year, if this fuel forecast were to play out and we would be at zero, then that goes away. And if that goes away, then what's left would be the total projected fuel rate or the forecast rate over the next period. Now, it would be something different. It wouldn't be 2.849 because that's what we're looking at for this period. So you would be looking at the projected fuel costs from May of 24 to April of 25. But what I would suspect is that if that under collection were to be essentially removed, or if we recover all of that under collected balance, then what would remain would simply be the forecast rate. And so that would be the good news that we're hoping for that I spoke with Commissioner Williams about earlier.
Okay. And you're the witness on the stipulation for Dominion. So, as I understood when the stipulation was introduced today, the reduced factor in the stipulation then, or I say reduced because it was less than what was in your corrected testimony, that factor came about because of updated forecast
That's correct.
from at the time you filed your testimony to the time y'all started talking about a stipulation.
Yeah, I would say that it's a result of more recent data in the form of we had our February actual data. At the time we filed the testimony, we only had January actual available to us. And then also we were able to update or adjust the forecast for the new gas prices, which were lower.
Okay.
Our initial forecast, I think over the March 23 to April 24 time period, had an average gas price of $3.54 a decatherm. And the new forecasted gas strip that we used from last Friday's close was at about $3.07.
Okay.
So that is the primary contributor to this lower number that we're able to put forward here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rooks. Mr. Neely, it's good to see you. I have no questions, though. It's always good to see you. Commissioners, any further questions? Mr. Anselmo?
Chair Belzer, that concludes the company's case.
Okay, thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony today. You may stand down. At this point, is there anything from SACE CCL? Okay, thank you, ma'am. Office of Regulatory Staff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are ready to present our case. I would call the first panel of witnesses, Donald Shane Hyatt and Omari Thompson.
Okay, let's proceed. I think they're waiting for you to swear them in, if you would, please.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Mr. Hyatt, Mr. Thompson, I am just going to ask you as a preliminary matter to just go ahead and pull the microphones closer to you. Thank you very much. Red light means on. If you don't see the red light, it's off. Mr. Hyatt, we're going to start with you. Good afternoon. Please state your full name for the record.
My name is Donald Shane Hyatt.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as a regulatory analyst.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared 11 pages of direct testimony pre-filed in this case on March 16th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I do.
Could you please explain those to the commission at this time?
On page 9, line 14, the docket number that reads 2022-254E should be 2022-259E.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Are there any other changes to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, there's not.
Thank you. Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Donald Shane Hyatt be entered into the record of this case as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Hyatt's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
Mr. Hyatt, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 6 exhibits labeled DSH1 and through DSH6 that were pre-filed along with your direct testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Hyatt, did you file a corrected exhibit DSH4 on March 20th, 2023?
I did.
Do you have any corrections, additions, or deletions to your pre-filed exhibits?
Yes, I do.
Could you please explain those changes at this time?
On corrected exhibit DSH4, there was a typographical error. The last line for the base fuel under recovery balance for the period ending December 2022 should read 451918204.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Are there any other corrections to your exhibits?
No, there's not.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that Mr. Hyatt's exhibits DSH1 through DSH3, corrected exhibit DSH4 with the correction that Mr. Hyatt just noted for the commission, and exhibits DSH5 and DSH6 be entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Hyatt's pre-filed exhibits. You're making this difficult for me. Mr. Hyatt's exhibits DSH1 through 3, corrected DHS4 as corrected from the stand today, and DSH5 and 6 will be marked as composite hearing exhibit number 6 and received into the evidence of the case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hyatt, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Please present your summary to the commission and the other parties.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Belzer, commissioners. My testimony sets forth ORS's findings and recommendations resulting from our examination of Dominion Energy South Carolina's fuel expenses used in the generation of electricity to meet its retail customer requirements. ORS examined various fuel-related documents that address the company's fuel, environmental, and purchase power expenses for the actual, estimated, and forecasted periods. ORS analyzed the company's monthly fuel reports and examined the company's contracts for nuclear fuel, coal, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, environmental reagents, purchase power, and the changes related to fuel contracts. ORS evaluated the company's policies and procedures for fuel procurement, transportation, and any changes related to its policies and procedures. Additionally, ORS utilizes industry and government publications to monitor current market conditions and trends for the nuclear, coal, natural gas, transportation, and renewable industries. ORS also met in person with company personnel from various departments as part of its review. ORS reviewed the company's projected sales and analyzed them with regard to the projections from its last fuel proceeding and the actual sales from the actual period. ORS found the company's sales projections to be reasonable. ORS reviewed the company's forecasted costs for nuclear fuel, coal, natural gas, fuel oil, transportation, environmental reagents, and purchase power for the estimated and forecasted periods. ORS compared the monthly projected cost to historical projections, actual data, and commodity prices from numerous industry publications. ORS found the company's forecasted cost to be reasonable. Subsequent to the filing of my direct testimony, ORS entered into stipulation with the company and South Carolina Energy Users Committee. Should the Commission approve the terms of the stipulation, the average monthly bill for a residential customer on rate 8 using 1,000 kilowatt hours would increase from $140.57 to approximately $146.06, a net increase of $5.49 or 3.91%. For general service and industrial customers, the proposed rates would increase the average monthly bills by approximately 4.63% and 7.11% respectively. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Mr. Thompson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Would you please state your full name for the record?
So Mario R. Thompson.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the Office of Regulatory Staff as a regulatory analyst.
Are you the same Amari Thompson who pre-filed 8 pages of direct testimony in this case on March 16th, 2023?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Omari Thompson be entered into the record of this case as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Thompson's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thompson, did you also cause to be pre-filed with your direct testimony 6 exhibits marked as ORT 1 through ORT 6?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your exhibits?
No, I do not.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that Mr. Thompson's exhibits ORT 1 through ORT 6 be admitted into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Thompson's pre-filed exhibits ORT 1 through ORT 6 will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit 7 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Thompson, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Would you please present that summary to the parties and to the commission?
Certainly. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to set forth ORS's recommendations resulting from ORS's examination and review of Dominion Energy South Carolina's power plant operations used in the generation of electricity to meet the company's retail customer requirements during the review period. In preparation for this proceeding, ORS examined various fuel and performance documents related to the company's electric generation and power plant outage and maintenance activities. ORS analyzed the company's monthly fuel reports, including power plant performance data, unit outages, heat rate data, and generation statistics. ORS also monitored electric generation statistics through industry and governmental publications. ORS attended the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's 2021 annual assessment meeting for the Virgil C. Summer Nuclear Station held on May 5th, 2022. Additionally, ORS met with company personnel from various departments to discuss and review the company's electric generation, power plant outages, and maintenance activities. Based on ORS's review of the company's operation of its generation facilities during the actual period, ORS determined that the company made reasonable efforts to maximize unit availability and minimize fuel costs. ORS found the company's plant outages to be reasonable based on ORS's review of the outage data from the actual period, forecasted outage data from docket number 2022-2-E, historical outage data from previous annual fuel proceedings, and industry experience. ORS also found the company's maintenance schedules and projected performance data for its power plants for the estimated period and the forecasted period to be reasonable. Subsequent to the filing of my direct testimony, ORS entered into a stipulation with the parties to resolve the issues in this case. ORS supports the stipulation, believes it is in the public interest, and recommends the Commission adopt the stipulation in its entirety without modification. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Madam Chair, at this time, Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Thompson are available for questions from the non-stipulating parties and the commissioners.
Thank you, Ms. Given. Say CCL.
Madam Chair, while Ms. Clancy's getting set up, I'm just going to remain here. That way we're not playing musical podiums, if that's acceptable to the commission.
Wherever you're most comfortable, just I ask that anybody speaking, speak into a microphone.
Of course. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hyatt and Mr. Thompson.
Good afternoon.
My name is Emma Clancy and I represent SACE and CCL. Can you hear me all right? Yes, ma'am. Now, Mr. Hyatt, under South Carolina law, utilities pass 100% of fuel costs, the costs incurred to run gas and coal plants, to customers in these annual fuel proceedings, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And this docket marks the third time in 1 year that Dominion has asked to increase customer bills to recover fuel costs. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And that's because the cost of fuel, especially natural gas, as we've heard, has increased significantly over the past year, correct?
Correct.
And 1 year ago, prior to Dominion's 2022 fuel cost proceeding, residential bills were around $126 for customers using 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if the commission approves the stipulation in this docket, those same customers will end up paying around $146 to use the same amount of energy, correct?
Correct, yes.
Mr. Hyatt, can you pull that microphone a little bit closer, please? Thank you.
And that $20 or 16% increase is largely due to increased fuel costs. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clancy. Commissioners, questions for the witness? The panel? Commissioner Carol Lee Williams?
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good afternoon.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon.
I don't do as well as my peers do at figuring out who can answer the questions, so I'm pitching them to both of you, and y'all can decide who can best answer them. You're not going to be surprised by this question because I ask a Dominion team the same question. You all are currently looking at an overcollection of $451 million. I think, and this would be witness Hyatt in the
Hyatt.
mid-year. Say it again?
Hyatt.
Yeah, Hyatt.
But a different Hyatt, right?
Yeah, different Hyatt, not the one that makes all the
Okay,
money on hotels.
so you may not be able to answer this because I've been figuring phonetically that I'm not speaking to either of you. But what I see is that Exhibit 2 in the mid-year from ORS was about 386 million that was estimated to be over collected. My question, if you can take it, is just that's a really big difference. What have you learned from that? You know, looking back, what was the, was it the volatility? What was it that caused the difference between what was expected at the mid-year time and what you're projecting now? Can either of you take that question?
Sure, I think I can. So, one thing we have learned is that forecasting is very difficult. You can take into consideration the market strip at the time that drives what the projected costs are going to be. You can take into consideration the usage that's projected, which is usually fairly accurate. But what you can't take into consideration is a hurricane going to hit at a certain period of time? Is a country going to attack another country that's going to drive up fuel costs? And those things, those unpredictable factors, I think, are what's hard to forecast. What we did do in the mid-period is kind of like we did with the stipulation in this one, towards the end when it was time to do a stipulation in that one, company ran another projection, got the most recent data, and tried to, project forward as best as they could. Does that answer your question?
I think I've got one other question, and it has to do with Mr. Thompson's Exhibit 6, ORT 6.
Okay. Turn to I am there.
Okay. What were your thoughts about coal coming in as the second cheapest unit behind nuclear in the cost per kilowatt?
My thoughts on that? Well, it makes sense. Or my thoughts on it, from reviewing the data that the company provided, looking at how the plants operated and what made sense for them as far as their economic dispatch. It reflected, what's actually taking place, at the plant. So it made sense.
And how are gas prices related to that, or are they?
Gas prices, I mean, globally, or
Yeah.
well, respectfully, Commissioner, my review didn't really take
Okay.
a look at that portion of it. It focused on power plant operations and whether or not they operated their plant efficiently. So I didn't really take a global view or perspective.
Okay. And then this is fuel cost and kilowatts per hour generation, correct?
Yes.
Does it include any O&M or capital cost? Just for clarity.
Not to my knowledge, Commissioner. Subject to check, but not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you very much. No further questions. Appreciate it.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Commissioners? Mr. Thompson, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You indicated that, based on your review, the outages that were experienced by the operating units were reasonable. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you identify any action or inaction or any cause by the utility which led to any increased fuel cost?
No, I did not.
Okay. And you had in your testimony that ORS reserves the right to review any outages for which there have not been reports or which are still ongoing. Are there any outages that will be looked at the next review period?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay, thank you.
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Hyatt, how are you this afternoon?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Did you indicated in your testimony that at the time the testimony was filed, ORS had no recommendations regarding the fuel factors proposed by Dominion at that time?
Correct.
And that was pre-stipulation, okay?
Correct, yes.
So I take it, based on that statute, that you did not identify any action or inaction by the utility which led to increased fuel cost. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. You had some recommendations in your testimony. I think one of them in particular is something that's been in the last few orders, where the utility should provide ORS and other interested parties, quarterly forecast?
It's quarterly forecast.
Could you tell me about that recommendation, please?
Sure. It's
Just say what it is. I just want it on the record.
right. It's language that we include in our testimony just in case there is no stipulation or agreement, so that the interested parties continue to receive the information.
And what is that information?
It's forecast and costs.
Okay, and it's issued quarterly?
Quarterly, yes, ma'am.
Well, 2 quarters, I think.
Right, 2
Okay.
quarters.
And do you know the purpose for that? Do you know how that came about? It might have predated your...
It was before my time.
Okay.
And not really part of my review. It's part of it's language we've included for the past few.
Subject to check, would you agree that that is because some of the large industrial users need a little bit of idea where things are going as they plan their budgets?
Subject to check, but yes.
Okay. And did you have any other recommendations in your testimony that you didn't cover in your summary?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Commissioners, any further questions? Any redirect, Ms. Gibbon? Oh, excuse me. Well, Dominion, never mind. Any redirect?
No redirect, Madam Chair.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony this afternoon. You may stand down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Knowles?
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS would call its next witness Dr. Maria Rumpani, who's appearing virtually.
Do we have Dr. Rumpani virtual yet? Or do we need a minute? There we go.
Here.
Good afternoon. We're getting set. Just bear with us a second. Madam Court Reporter, would you swear the witness for us? Dr. Rumpani, would you state your name for me?
My name is Maria Rumpani.
And the court reporter is going to swear you in. If you'd raise your right hand, please.
Do you swear from the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Hello, Dr. Rumpani. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Would you please state your name and occupation for the record?
yes. My name is Maria Rumpani. I am the technical director at Strategic Consulting.
Are you the same Maria Rumpani who caused to be pre-filed 19 pages of direct testimony and 2 exhibits labeled MR1 and MR2 on March 16th, 2023 in this docket?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed testimony or exhibits?
No.
If I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, ORS asks that the pre-filed direct testimony of Dr. Rumpani be read into the record as if given orally from the stand, and that exhibits MR1 and MR-2 be marked as a composite hearing exhibit and entered into the record as the next exhibit.
Dr. Rumpani's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand. Dr. Rumpani's pre-filed direct exhibits marked RM1 and RM2 will be the next composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 8 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Rumpani, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes.
Would you please share your summary with the Commission?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my testimony is to present findings and observations regarding the analysis that Dominion Energy South Carolina employed to inform its decision-making during the events of Winter Storm Elliott. In doing so, I reviewed the company's operational plan for December 23, 24, and 25, 2022, and analyzed several key factors that either informed the operational plan or resulted in deviations from it as events continued to unfold during December 24 and 25, 2022. With the objective of minimizing risk exposure for these DSC customers in the event of future extreme weather events, I make recommendations regarding the company's post-event analysis and how it should inform the company's future planning efforts. Based on my review, I find that the company's decisions in response to the storm were reasonable. However, the company's planning, as well as its response to the events on December 24, 2022, were constrained by 3 factors that may be within the utility's control in the longer term. Specifically, I discuss how the company's load forecast, constraints that affected the company's gas supply, and finally, the availability of the company's demand response resources have limited the company's ability to respond to the system's needs during the storm, resulting in significant emergency purchases from neighboring utilities. First, I find that the company's load forecast included errors on both December 24 and December 25. I recommend that DESC reevaluate its forecasting tools and analysis with a focus on the cause that led to the inaccuracies in the load forecast, whether such inaccuracies were specific to the event of the storm, and ways to improve its forecasting methodology, especially in anticipation of similar future weather events. The review and resulting conclusions should be made available to the Commission and other interested parties. Second, I note that limitations on natural gas supply played a major role in the events of December 24, 2022. Specifically, DESC does not have enough firm transportation contracts to run its existing gas units at full capacity, especially during extreme weather events when the peaking capacity is most needed. This was a major consideration in the company's decision-making and led to increased generation from combustion turbines, as those were switched to fuel oil, and increased reliance on off-system sales. I recommend that the Commission require DESC to review and present a fuel plan for the gas-fired units. At a minimum, the report should include the company's fuel plan for all gas units for the next year and any alternatives that the company has considered to alleviate the natural gas supply constraints, including the cost of those alternatives. Finally, I find that the company's demand response program was of limited value during the storm. This was due to the design of the interruptible service rider, which provides that interruptible load is compensated through a discounted rate, but does not need to be available to interrupt during the weekend. I recommend that the company undertake a review of the existing demand response resources and provide the information to the Commission and ORS. This could include the historical performance of existing demand response resources, their cost and performance over the past year, as well as an investigation of the option of economic curtailment, meaning the option to curtail load under economic criteria and not only during system emergencies. This concludes my summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rumpani. Madam Chair, Dr. Rumpani is available for cross from SACCL and for questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. SACCL, Ms. Mixon.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rampani. My name is Kate Mixon. I represent the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great, thanks. Dr. Rampani, you were retained by the Office of Regulatory Staff to review Dominion's performance during Winter Storm Elliott. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I reviewed Dominion's decision-making and performance during those 2 days.
Thank you. You state in your testimony that a goal of your review was to minimize risk exposure for DESC customers in the event of future extreme weather events. Is that right?
Yes.
And as part of that, you found that the company's unit commitment, as well as its response to the events on December 24th, 2022, which was the date of Winter Storm Elliott, that those were constrained by factors that may be within the utility's control in the longer term. Is that right?
That is correct.
So is it fair to say that your testimony was intended to make recommendations about changes that the company could make, tools within their control that could improve their system reliability and reduce risk to their customers from these types of extreme events?
That is correct, yes.
Right. So over the review period, Dominion's generation was composed of roughly 47% gas and 17% coal. Does that sound right?
I haven't looked at the entire review period, but being in the hearing today, that sounds correct.
Okay, great. Thanks. In discussing the company's response to Winter Storm Elliott, you state that the company was restricted in what it could plan for in the first place because of fuel supply limitations. I mean, you cited to some discovery from the company stating that it currently burns fuel oil at all of its simple combustion turbines except for Urquhart on cold days. Is that right?
That is my understanding, yes.
And why did that issue concern you? Or why was that an issue that you identified in your testimony?
Because my understanding is that the fuel supply is limited not only for the combustion turbines, but might also have implications for some of the combined cycle units that they have. They need to make decisions on which of those to run. Fuel switching has a risk associated, and also some other units might not be dual fuel. So those units might be limited in whether they can operate on those days or not. So my finding was that subject to those constraints, the company made every effort to operate efficiently on those days, but moving forward, it would be good if they could review those constraints and any alternative that could help them alleviate them and not have to deal with something like that again in the future.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Rampani. And I think I'll get to some of those alternatives in a minute. You also cited some concerns about how those fuel supply issues could affect the reliability of Dominion's system during these extreme weather events that stress the grid. Is that right?
Yes.
And so I know you just talked about some risks associated with fuel switching. I guess I'll back up a little bit. Those kinds of extreme events, those are really when you most need the resources to work, right?
Correct.
Okay. And on the morning of December 24th, the company experienced outages at several of its gas, coal, and its fuel oil capable units, right?
That is my understanding.
Yep. And so that was at Columbia Energy Center, Urquhart, and Watery, and those all tripped offline on that morning, right?
Yes.
And those outages, some of which were weather related and some of which were not. Regardless, they meant that those units, and especially the company's combined cycle units, ended up producing significantly less than what the company had planned for, right?
Yes.
Okay. So your testimony also discusses your review of the company's operational plans, and you state that the company has to have a decision-making process in place on how to commit its generation units, and then list a number of different conditions or scenarios that the company has to consider, such as fuel cost forecasts, weather forecasts, expected demand, fuel supplies, etc. Is that an accurate characterization of your testimony?
Yes, that's correct. I'm not sure exactly which portion you referred to.
So I can point you to it. I'm on so page 6 of your direct testimony, line 7 through 11.
Apologies, give me just 1 minute.
Sure.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. And so, the company has to evaluate all of these interrelated factors to determine how to operate its existing resource mix and hopefully, minimize any risks associated with that particular resource mix. Is that right?
Correct.
And that includes fuel cost risks, right?
That is correct. Although the ability of the company to minimize fuel risk in the short term is a little bit more limited than when considering longer term planning.
Right. So then you would agree then, it sounds like, that, when you're evaluating utilities' fuel cost expenditures and, identifying if there may have been steps that the utility could have taken, perhaps, over the longer term to reduce those risks, that could require looking at the utility's resource mix, right?
That is correct. It is just my understanding that these might be outside of the scope of the fuel docket, which is why I focused on what happened in the short term. But in general, I agree with that.
Well, we can talk about that a little bit. So long-term planning decisions, those are often, kind of made in integrated resource plan or IRP dockets. Is that right?
Correct.
But these fuel cost dockets, they provide a window into the impact of a utility's resource decisions on customers, at least as it relates to fuel cost impacts. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so kind of thinking about, both the IRPs and these fuel cost dockets, would you agree that, these annual fuel proceedings could provide, useful information to the commission about, the risks that are associated with a utility's existing resource mix, that might be helpful, in their next IRP proceeding?
I agree, and this is why two of my recommendations are actually, although I find that the company responded reasonably, two of my recommendations are that the company summarizes and provides that information before the commission so that it can inform future planning wherever, the right venue for that is.
Great. And so I guess just to make it explicit, I guess kind of on the flip side of my last question, a utility's IRP could likewise provide, could provide information that might be useful, in these fuel proceedings, such as, how the utility may be planning over the longer term to mitigate any fuel cost risks within its resource mix.
Objection, Madam Chair. And apologies, Ms. Mixon. I understand where you're going. I think just for the limited purposes of this proceeding that these kind of questions are starting to go a little bit beyond the scope of this particular proceeding.
This cross-exam, Mr. Knowles, I'm going to allow this to go a little bit.
Thank you, Chair Belser. So according to the your qualifications that were attached as the first exhibit to your testimony, when you were with the Energy Economics and Environmental Modeling Laboratory, you helped develop the mathematical models that kind of underpin the capacity expansion models that utilities use for IRPs. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And it's safe to say those are pretty complicated, right?
Those are complicated. I was, looking at that 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when the decisions about the transition started becoming very important, and thinking about how to make economic decisions became very important.
Right. And so since then, you've gone on to testify in or provide modeling or other supporting analysis in a number of utility IRP proceedings. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And so based on your experience from those proceedings and just your extensive experience in the energy industry, you're familiar with the costs, operational characteristics, and risks associated with different resource types. Is that right?
Yes.
And you keep up to date with market changes or technological advances, other industry trends that may affect those characteristics of the different resource types.
Yes.
And so you're familiar with the risks associated with fuel cost volatility, right?
Yes, this is correct.
So I just have a few kind of general questions for you about cost and reliability risks from fuel resources, and as you say in your direct testimony here, ways to minimize risk exposure for Dominion customers in the event of future extreme weather events. You very recently, and I believe this was actually just a few weeks ago, filed testimony on behalf of, and I apologize, this is going to be a mouthful, the Michigan Energy and Innovation Business Council, the Institute for Energy Innovation, Advanced Energy United, and Clean Grid Alliance in the IRP proceeding for a DTE electric company before the Michigan Public Service Commission. Is that right?
Yes.
And in that proceeding, you also testified about kind of potential, reliability and cost risks from associated with different kind of resource decisions. Is that right?
Yes.
And specifically, you testified about potential reliability risks from resource portfolios that rely too heavily on natural gas. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Could you expand a little bit on what those reliability risks are?
Objection, Madam Chair. I think at this point we've gotten fully away.
I think
from
we're getting a
fuel and
bit out of the realm here, Ms. Mixon.
I mean, Chair Belzer, this feels very kind of squarely within the scope of her testimony. Her testimony was on ways that the company could mitigate risks, tools within their control that they could use to mitigate fuel cost increases. I am asking questions about very recent testimony that she filed in another proceeding about some other tools that are available, and I'm just seeking
All right,
to ask her about.
just ask her about the tools if you don't mind.
Chair Belzer, we would concur with
I understand.
objection.
I've ruled.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Doctor, please go ahead. You need the question repeated?
Yes, that would be helpful.
Could you explain some of the reliability risks that, in your expert opinion, are associated with portfolios that rely too heavily on natural gas resources?
I think, and those have been touched upon before in the hearing. One concern is fuel volatility that, exists for some of the thermal resources. And the second one has to do with fuel supply, and that's what I touched upon in my testimony on whether the units or the supply for the units to be operational is there during critical times for the grid.
Right. Do you also agree that energy storage can reduce risks associated with fluctuating fossil fuel prices?
Yes, that is correct. I believe that. But again, these seems to fall more in like an integrated resource plan proceeding. But I would agree that renewables and energy storage help mitigate that risk and volatility.
Could you explain a little bit of how storage can be used to mitigate fuel cost volatility? Like, how can it be operated during an event in ways that might mitigate some of those periods where gas prices are particularly high?
Of course, yes. So storage can be charged during times when energy prices are lower, either because renewable generation is available or during hours when demand is low and some of the thermal resources are operating, and dispatch discharge that energy in hours of need for the grid at no additional cost.
Right. And Dr. Rapine, were you listening into the hearing earlier when Dominion witness Rose Jackson was testifying?
Yes.
So I'm paraphrasing, and I'm sure that Dominion Council will correct me if I misstate anything, but Ms. Jackson stated that battery storage technologies need to advance further before they can be reliably used to reduce peak demands or improve system reliability. Do you agree with that statement?
My take is that my opinion is that battery storage can start being deployed in the very near term and start transitioning away from some of the uneconomic resources.
And so you would identify energy storage as often more economic to deploy than compared with natural gas resources. Is that right?
It depends on the specific utility and the level of deployment of every resource, but especially now with the available IRA credits, the economics have drastically changed, yes. and those resources are cost competitive.
Okay, thank you. So changing course just a little bit. Your testimony again was on Dominion's response to Winter Storm Elliott. You'd agree Dominion doesn't have control over the weather, does it?
I wish they had, but no, it seems none of us has.
Right.
In the short term.
But if their system isn't able to handle a weather event, the utility can't just sit back and hope that the weather changes so that it isn't a problem anymore, can they?
No, although I'm not sure I understand what the question is here.
Right. Well, that's fine. I can clarify a little bit here. So, for example, Dominion experienced weather-related outages at Columbia Energy Center due to the extreme cold temperatures from Elliott, right?
Yes.
And in response, they've now hired an outside engineering firm. They're reviewing the heat trace system that failed during that event. And they're making plans to upgrade the freeze protection systems at all of the units at Columbia Energy Center. Is that right?
I'm not aware of that, but if you say so, yes, there is no reason to disagree on that.
I believe that witness Delk had that in his direct testimony on page 22. So subject to check. I guess, would you agree that Dominion has a duty to respond to things that are out of their control, like the weather, by identifying things within their control, like putting in place new procedures or systems, so that they are well situated, or as well situated as they can be, to weather those storms, so that they can continue to provide reliable service and affordable service to their customers?
Yes,
objection.
I agree.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter. And my only objection was that it calls for a legal conclusion. I have no objection to her providing a response to the policy side of that question.
Are you objecting, or did you say not? Never mind.
Object to the extent that it requests a legal conclusion. No objection to the extent that she's asking for a policy.
We recognize that the doctor's not an attorney, and that this would be more of a policy.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm not saying like a legal duty, but rather kind of a like that is their role as a regulated utility. So again, Dominion witness Jackson, and this was in response to commissioner questions earlier. She listed a number of kind of factors and outside forces that she stated in her opinion either are currently affecting or that she is concerned will affect the company's ability to provide reliable service to its customers now or in the future. Does that, do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And just to kind of list a few, that included challenges to permits and ongoing litigation on gas pipelines, federal rules and regulations to reduce air and water pollution from coal plants, political and economic factors affecting the domestic and international markets for fuel, et cetera. Do you recall hearing some of those factors in her testimony? Right. Those factors that witness Jackson identified, those are all outside of the company's control, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So if the company is facing an ongoing storm of all of those factors that they cannot control and which increasingly are making coal and gas plants more difficult, expensive, or infeasible to operate or construct, wouldn't you agree the utility should be looking for alternatives within their control to protect their customers from those risks?
Could I just object to and just ask Ms. Mixon to restate the question? It was confusing.
I mean, I would ask whether Dr. Rapani is confused by the question, but I'm also happy to restate.
I think it restate it, but it's assuming facts not in evidence also.
Okay. So would you agree again that those factors, all of the ones that I listed, such as, again, kind of challenges to pipeline litigation, current or future regulatory requirements, would you agree that, in general, those factors are kind of increasingly trending the industry away from fossil fuel resources because those factors are making those plants kind of increasingly expensive, difficult to operate or to construct?
So it's just, I want to be careful not to, overgeneralize with anything that I don't know specifically about, like Dominion's long-term planning or anything that doesn't fall within the scope of this docket. But as a general statement, yes, there is, right now, there are a lot of factors that are trending towards the grid's decarbonization.
And given those factors and those trends, would you agree that it is prudent for utilities generally to look for alternatives to fossil fuel resources, or to look for alternatives within their control to protect their customers from any of those risks associated with continued operation of or new construction of those fossil fuel resources?
Again, as a general statement and without having looked at what exactly Dominion is doing in their planning, I would agree with that statement.
Okay. And again, and I'm really kind of talking generally about kind of utilities in the United States that are kind of similarly situated to Dominion, not necessarily Dominion specifically. But I guess if a utility didn't try to respond to those different factors, the utility would essentially be kind of offloading some of those risks onto their customers, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Okay. In your expert opinion, in light of all of those factors, do you think that it might be prudent for the company to evaluate its own resource mix, whether its current gas and coal generation may be too risky for customers, or if it's too risky for customers, and evaluate all of the tools available? Actually, I'll break this into some questions. In light of those factors, do you think it might be prudent for the company to evaluate its own resource mix and the risks associated with the gas and coal resources?
Chair Belzer, we have now had a question that admitted we're talking about resource planning, which has no relevance to the proceeding here today. So I think it is irrelevant and we should move along.
Chair Belzer, with all due respect, we established earlier on in some of my questions that there is a very close relationship between these fuel dockets and the utilities IRP. And with all due respect, Witness Jackson testified at length about the company's resource mix and the risks that she saw, associated with that, now and in the future. I'm just asking questions to Dr. Rampani for her expert opinion on some of those issues.
Chair Belzer, she's asking general planning questions, not questions related to these specific costs.
I have to agree with that. If you can get away from the generality and address this docket, it would the generation mix or what's happening in this docket, it would be more appropriate. So I'm going to sustain that. You can rephrase your question.
Yeah, I mean, my most recent question was specific to the company. do you think that it would be prudent for the company to evaluate its own resource mix to determine whether the risks from its current resource mix are too high for customers?
Yes, at any given point, I think that a utility should be reviewing the changing market and policy environment and be evaluating constantly their generation fleet and how they're planning for the future.
Okay, and as part of that, again, I mean, that may require evaluating all of the tools within the company's control to mitigate potential risks from any future planned investment in natural gas. Is that right?
Yes.
And in your opinion, should that include evaluating whether the company should add additional energy storage or solar to its resource mix?
Asked and answered. Just objection in the interest of, I don't think we're covering new ground at this point.
I don't actually believe that.
Go ahead. Overruled.
So the question was whether the company should evaluate adding more
I have a
energy
separate
storage
objection.
in their resource mix.
Just a moment, please, Dr. Rapani.
I apologize for interrupting, but I again go to relevance. There's been no specific question related to any specific cost in this case. General planning is separate from specific recovery of these costs in this hearing.
I understand. We're going to allow this question, then we're going to tighten down. Go ahead.
I only have a couple more questions.
Well, let's just, okay. Dr. Rapani, do you need that question restated?
Is the question whether the company should assess whether more energy storage should be added in its resource mix, or have I misinterpreted something?
No, I think that's the question.
Yes, that's the question.
Okay. Within its resource planning, the company should evaluate whether they can add more energy storage, more renewables, or other resource types. And I think that information from the fuel docket can inform this decision making. But I have only reviewed, what falls within this docket. So all of that information could be taken and used in a different proceeding, but I cannot speak specifically as to what would be done. In terms of assessing all resource types, yes, absolutely.
Just give me one moment. That's all my questions. Thank you, Dr. Rapani.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Commissioners, Commissioners.
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you. Dr. Rapani, I want to talk with you about some alternative sources of fuel. Have you had an opportunity in the course of your work to study what is being called green hydrogen? Are you familiar with that as a fuel?
I am familiar with that, although I haven't studied that in particular, like in depth.
I understand. Let me ask you just a couple of questions. If you don't know, just tell us and I'll move on. Is hydrogen considered to be high in energy content compared to other fuels?
Hydrogen can be, I don't have the answer to that. No.
Okay. Well, let me ask it this way. When hydrogen is combusted, does it release any of the toxic compounds that fossil fuels release? Do you know?
Okay, so you're talking about the carbon content. It depends on how hydrogen is created, and there are multiple ways. And when we're talking about green hydrogen, that comes from renewables, so it wouldn't have a carbon content.
It would not. Is that correct? True. All right. In fact, when it's combusted, it releases harmless water vapor, doesn't it?
I really don't want to talk about anything that's on the like chemistry. Because I don't know. That's not my expertise.
I'll move on. Assuming that it becomes a part of the future energy mix, you have one more option that could be considered to help meet the needs of the utility in terms of resources.
Yes.
Generation resources. Okay.
It could. The only thing that I would like to add here is that there is still some uncertainty around the cost and like the scale of and the timing of when that would be available.
Right. And I heard you speak about battery storage earlier. That is actually being implemented now across the country by many investor-owned utilities. Is that true?
That is true. We're talking about mainly batteries of like 2 hours, 4 hours, but my understanding is that there is a lot of research for longer duration energy storage systems as well.
Are they studying batteries that can last 8, 9, 10 hours? Is that being studied?
Yes, there are companies that are studying even like much longer than that.
And when do you think that those battery storage units will be available for introduction into a fuel source grid, so to speak?
I think that there have been announcements about pilot programs, at the later half of this decade. When those will be, available at a larger scale, I don't know, but there definitely are some announcements for pilot programs.
Yeah. Were you aware that our neighboring state of North Carolina just started up an 11 megawatt storage facility at the Marine base at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina? Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. If you could make one recommendation to Dominion in terms of its fuel mix going forward, what would your number one recommendation be?
I think, going back to what I said earlier, every utility should be looking at all of them, the resource options they have in front of them. It is a time that markets are changing. The policy environment has changed dramatically, and the transition could be accelerated. So I am an IRP person. So answering, giving one recommendation, it's too difficult. I understand how complex resource planning is, but I think that every utility should look at all of the resource options, try to look into lessons learned from operations of previous years as well. Now that we're seeing some of the extreme weather events, inform their future decision making, maximize the federal funding that is available and move forward. But again, I recognize that for every utility, there are a lot of complexities that will be dealt within the appropriate proceeding.
And you mentioned federal funds. Are you aware that the United States Department of Energy has made available large sums of money to support some of these new options like hydrogen and storage, battery storage?
Yes.
And will those grant monies that are coming available now, will they help reduce the cost that have to be paid for some of these resources?
That is the objective.
Okay. And so if a company like Dominion chose to seek out those resources, would they become eligible for federal tax credits perhaps, or grants?
There are a lot of tax credits through IRA, and they cover a very large range of different resources, clean resources.
We won't try to go into all of them right now, but just generally speaking, could the utility customers benefit if their utility company took advantage of the IRA tax credits or grants? Could that translate to a benefit for customers?
Yes.
And the reason it would is it would reduce customer costs, would it not, in the long term?
Correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Caston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Ms. Raponi.
Good afternoon.
Did you work or communicate directly with any of the Dominion personnel, or did you work through ORS?
I did communicate with Dominion in 2 calls, always facilitated by ORS.
Okay. It wasn't a trick question or anything. I just wanted to see, how this worked. How were they to work with? Were they nice to you, or were they mean and hateful?
Absolutely nice. Very open to discussion.
Glad to hear it. On the recommendations, which we talked a lot about, and I've read them, and I've read those in your testimony. And even after hearing all of this talk, I still want to make sure I understand them. I think it was the 3rd bullet, but you say, and that, the next fuel proceeding, a discussion of the company's review of its existing demand response resources, cost performance, and an evaluation of the potential savings from using company's existing resources to curtail based on economics of system emergencies. Kind of break that down for me and tell me, what does that mean?
Absolutely. So my understanding, again, after talking with Dominion, is that they made every effort to communicate with some of their large customers for the interrupted load, given that this was a weekend and a holiday weekend. The load did not have to be available. So it didn't, provide a lot of load reduction that could help the company. So I think that, with that in mind, I recommended that the company look into what their existing programs are and how they're operating those programs. The customers are being compensated to be available for curtailment. So if the program design is so that this doesn't happen, this hasn't happened historically, I don't know the answer to that. That would be a good data point for the company to have as they're, planning for future programs. Now, the second point on economic curtailment, my understanding is that the company only curtails load when there is a system emergency, meaning that otherwise they would have to set firm load. So I'm only making a recommendation that the company could consider or could evaluate the potential of using demand response for hours that, like, their other generation is too expensive to operate, or, emergency purchases are too expensive and DR could come at a lower cost.
Okay. And I think your second bullet or second recommendation talked about a fuel plan for gas-fired units, alternatives. Let's see, alternatives for, I guess, considering alleviating natural gas supply constraints associated with companies' firm transportation contracts and cost of those alternatives. I understand some of that, but I'm not sure I understand all of it. Could you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yes, of course. And I assume that the company already does a lot of that as they're making decisions for their gas supply. It's just a matter of putting that all together in a plan so that it can be, before the commission and ORS. But questions that I had when I started reviewing that was, how much of their gas supply has firm transportation? How much gas supply would their units require to be run at full load? Does that result in a limitation in the capacity that could be available? How much firm transportation could be available if the company wanted? Because it might also be that the company doesn't have the option to contract for more firm transportation. So all those data points as to how the company is thinking and what the cost of that is, what the cost of the alternative would be, because, entering into a contract for firm transportation could be available, but might be too expensive for periods that are not peak periods. Just creating a comprehensive plan that presents those medium-term decisions and how they're made and how they can inform future efforts.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground. Seemed like breached a lot of subjects. And I've heard, I think, battery storage mentioned a few times. Heard you mention pilot programs, which I suspect most people know what that is, but what is a pilot program?
So these are smaller programs that are designed for the company or like the operator to gain some experience with how the technology operates, and it gives also the possibility to the technology to be deployed at a smaller scale and have some operational experience.
And I've heard a lot of different numbers relative to batteries, battery storage, and I suspect it could be infinite depending on how many you have, but is there a maximum length of time that a battery storage can be relied upon? 2 hours, 4 hours, 12 hours, 36, 56?
That is a great question.
But an important one.
A very important one. So I can talk about the duration of a battery, and that can range from some seconds to, like, there are pilot programs for 100 hours. Now, you asked about how many hours could the battery be relied upon, and that is an even more complicated question, because it requires us to know how much energy it has stored in the battery. And that very much depends on, the season that we're talking about, the resource mix for the rest of the portfolio. And there are a lot of studies currently being conducted for that.
Okay. And this was asked earlier, I can't remember who was asked of, but I think Commissioner Powers asked this question. I just can't remember whom. He was talking about, I think batteries was mentioned again, and there was a question relative to solar panels. And he had asked about the, I guess, components, the components of the panel, the batteries, the materials, the rare earth metals, the lithium, all of those things. Do you know how much of that is domestic? How much of that is here? We don't have to rely on anybody to get these materials. Do you know that answer?
I don't have that answer. The only thing that I might say is that I know that through IRA, there are some credits that are designed to incentivize the manufacturing domestically.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've heard this a few times. Manufacturing domestically is wonderful. But if we do not control the rare earth elements, the stuff that you build them with, is that really onshore manufacturing? And it's not a trick question. I don't know the answer to that, and I don't seem to be able to get the answer to that. Well, I guess here's what I'm struggling with as a commissioner, personally. I absolutely think it is wise and prudent to have diverse energy sources. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket, as I've heard it said. Do you agree with that?
I agree with the statement. I'm not sure I would, we would define diversity in the same way.
Well, tell me what you think it
Mignon
is.
earlier defined it, but the general statement of like, don't put all the eggs in one basket would apply in the electricity sector as well.
What is diverse generation to you? Tell me what you think it is.
I think it can be a system that has a lot of different types of resources. Some of them would be renewables, solar, wind, offshore wind, as you suggested, some portion of thermal generation, maybe some of the newer technologies that are not proven yet, but are developing, whether that's long duration energy storage or hydrogen or some nuclear technologies. But, when we're talking about like a system that's 40 or 80% dependent on one resource, we should definitely include more resource types.
So what should it be? Should it be, and this is hypothetical, should it be 25% nuclear, 25% gas, 25% coal, 25% solar batteries, or should it be 50% solar? What should it be?
I wish I had the answer to that. My job would be easier. I don't have that answer.
I understand that. Again, my only concern as a commissioner, is when people, businesses, anyone flips a switch, they want the lights to come on and not pay any more than they have to pay. No more than necessary. So whatever that mix is, it seems like we have a myriad of opinions, but opinions are just opinions. So what I'm trying to get to, and I know you can't provide it, and I've not really heard it in the duration of this hearing and other hearings, is there seems to be great concern about the volatility of certain fuels. I get it. I understand that. But I also have a concern that if we're going to have this rush to this particular thing, that's maybe pilot studies, it might last this long, it may be wonderful. It may be. I don't know. But if we don't have the parts here, if we don't have the rare earth metals here, if we don't have the lithium here, I don't care if we've got 50 manufacturing companies. If we can't get the parts, the materials, the rare earth metals, is that going to be a problem?
I don't have any specific data to provide for where those materials come from and how many of them could be produced here.
Well, that was, I guess, hypothetical because I don't know the answer. So if we cannot, hypothetically, if we can't get those materials, would that be a problem?
That is, again, going back to the diverse portfolio. You know, if we had a system that's 80% reliant on one technology and that technology requires material that are not produced in the US, then that's definitely a problem. However, through grants and other funding, my understanding is that, you know, a lot of different options are explored. Some of them are now commercially viable and some of them might be or might not be in the future. And that's like the objective is to minimize a single point of failure, like to not have a single point of failure.
Okay. I'll just leave it there. I guess perhaps sometime between now and whenever we have another hearing, or maybe after that one, we can get a little more information. And yes, it may be viable, and yes, we can use it, and yes, it may be being done here or there. I'm sure that's the case. Well, it is the case. I know it's the case. But what concerns me, I still have not heard a definitive answer on, is if the people that are manufacturing them or have the materials that produce these things or make them work, if they get mad at us and decide not to sell them to us, I think that's a problem. All I want to know is it a problem? Is it not a problem? You've already answered that, so that's just a rhetorical question. But you know what? You've been very patient. You've been very kind, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Commissioners, any further questions of this witness? Mr. Knowles.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly. Dr. Rumpani, did you conduct a comprehensive IRP analysis as part of your review in this proceeding?
No, I did not.
Was your review focused on the company's response to Winter Storm Elliott?
Yes, it was focused only on those 2 days.
And you know, there's been a lot of talk about issues that are likely going to be addressed in integrated resource planning context. Would you agree with that? Because you didn't conduct a comprehensive IRP analysis as part of this proceeding, your ability to answer some of those questions in the context of this fuel proceeding is going to be somewhat limited. Is that fair?
Yes, and that's why I try to only make some general statements, but nothing specific to the company's IRP because I have not reviewed that.
And Dr. Rumpani, you did make certain recommendations in your testimony, correct?
Correct.
And those are materially incorporated into the stipulation filed between ORS, the company, and the South Carolina Energy Users Committee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rumpani.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Any recross? Very limited. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Are we
Madam
doing okay? We haven't had an afternoon break. Madam Court Reporter, are you okay? We've got 2 more witnesses.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Everybody okay? Okay, let's go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ORS calls its next panel of witnesses, Daniel J. Rowland IV and Gretchen Poole, to the stand.
I didn't ask the
And
commissioner.
Madam Chair, this is Alex Knowles, and I do recognize that I asked for a witness to be excused at my own peril. Dr. Rimpani, it's midnight where she is testifying from in Greece, and as a result of the late hour, I would ask that Dr. Rimpani be excused.
That's up to you, Mr. Knowles, and that's fine if you want to excuse her.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Court Reporter, would you swear the witnesses, please?
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Mr. Rowland, Ms. Poole, as you get settled, I'm going to ask that you just go ahead and pull those microphones as close to you as you can. Thank you. Mr. Rowland, we'll start with you. Good afternoon. Would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Daniel J. Rowland IV.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as an auditor.
Thank you. Are you the same Daniel J. Rowland who pre-filed 15 pages of direct testimony in this proceeding on March 16th, 2023?
I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Daniel J. Rowland IV be entered into the record of this case as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Rowland's direct pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
And Mr. Rowland, did you also cause to be pre-filed with your direct testimony 8 exhibits marked as DJR1 through DJR8?
I did.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your exhibits?
I do not.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that Mr. Rowland's exhibits DJR1 through DJR8 be admitted into the record of this case as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Rowland's exhibits DRJ1 through DJR8 will be the next composite hearing exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit 9 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Mr. Rowland, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please present that summary to the parties and to the commission?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. The purpose of my direct testimony is to explain the scope of ORS's examination of Dominion Energy South Carolina's books and records as they pertain to the company's operation of the fuel adjustment clause in the current filing and to present the results of ORS's examination. ORS examined and verified the monthly over-under recovery calculation and balances as recorded by the company for the 12-month review period that ended December 2022. My direct testimony also explains the 8 exhibits that I sponsor for this hearing detailing these calculations. Based on ORS's review, ORS agrees with the balances and the adjustments as put forth by the company for the 12-month review period that ended December 2022. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Rowland. Ms. Poole, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Please state your full name for the record.
Gretchen C. Poole.
Are you the same Gretchen Poole who pre-filed 7 pages of direct testimony in this case on March 16th, 2023?
Yes, I am.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you the same questions today as those posed in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Gretchen Poole be entered into the record of this case as if given orally from the stand.
Ms. Poole's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Poole, did you also cause to be pre-filed with your direct testimony 1 exhibit marked as GCP1?
Yes.
Do you have any changes, edits, or corrections to your exhibit?
No, I don't.
Madam Chair, at this time, I would move that Ms. Poole's exhibit GCP1 be admitted into the record of this case as the next hearing exhibit.
Ms. Poole's exhibit GCP1 will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit 10 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Poole, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please present your summary for the parties and the commission?
Yes. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission.
ORS found the company's actual and estimated avoided and incremental DERP costs in this proceeding to be reasonable and accurately calculated. Their calculations complied with Act 236 and with this Commission's orders and directives in previous DERP-related proceedings. ORS recommends that the Commission accept the company's proposed updates to the NEM tariffs. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this afternoon, and this concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Poole. Madam Chair, at this time, Mr. Rowland and Ms. Poole are available for questions from the non-stipulating parties and questions from the Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Given. SACE CCL.
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioners. Commissioners? Anybody? Ms. Given?
Madam Chair, if there are no questions, then I would ask that this panel be permitted to step down and be excused.
Thank
and that
you.
would conclude the presentation of ORS's case.
Mr. Rowland, I hate that you didn't get subject to cross-examination today. But
Oh, it's okay.
okay. Ms. Poole has experienced that before, but it's good to have you both here. Thank you very much for your testimony today.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Anything further from ORS?
Nothing from ORS, Madam Chair.
Anything further from Dominion?
No, Chair Bells, nothing further.
Okay. Anything other from the interveners? Anything further? Excuse me. We still have a couple of public witnesses to hear from at 6 o'clock, so we will be in recess until 6 o'clock. Are there any parties that want to be excused? If that is your desire, you may. Okay. We are in recess until, let's come back just a couple of minutes before 6 so we can be set to go at 6 when we have, hopefully, the public witnesses in attendance. We're in recess until about, well, let's say 5 till, although we won't come on the record till 6. Thank you.